Hello and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast with your host, Charles Kyriakou. Today's solo show, we're going to be talking about why recruiters in 2024 suck at cold calling. Now, there's three reasons why I believe recruiters suck at cold calling in 2024, and I boiled them down to three things. The first reason is because recruiters don't do any research or any preparation before their call. The second reason is recruiters are very, very underprepared to deal with objections from clients. And on a cold call, typically what happens, they'll get the initial objection, we don't use recruiters, etc., and a recruiter will just crumble. The third reason, and again, there's going to be a lot more different reasons why they suck, but the third reason why recruiters suck at cold calling is because they ask really crap questions. And that's a big, big pet peeve of mine is people that ask crap questions in recruitment, because I always say to people in recruitment, you are a reflection of the questions you ask. Essentially, the whole aspect of recruitment, the whole job from start to finish is just asking questions. So if you're not good at asking questions, something's gone really, really wrong. So let's talk firstly about the first part, what I mentioned is the research and preparation. Now, I'll be very, very honest. When I first started permanent recruitment, I was one of those people that would just pick up the phone, call someone, and then look at a CV. I would pick up the phone and call them, then go and do some research on their website. Now, I would not suggest people use that technique because did it work all the time? No, if I'm honest, I had quite a few issues where I'd get stuck because they were like, well, did you not know this or did you not see this? So it is always worth doing your research. So let's actually dive into what you would actually research, what you would prepare for a cold call. So the first things first, especially for recruiters in the tech market, a lot of companies will be going through an investment round. They'll be seeking investment. So it's always really useful to see what that has actually been. Like, what specifically did they get? What investment? How much investment? Who did they get investment from? That would be one of the first things. Now, not everybody is super active on LinkedIn, but if you were to cold call me, I post 3 to 5 days a week on LinkedIn. If you weren't to reference that, if you got through to me, it's a bit silly, really, isn't it? So if you've got a hiring manager that has, I always give this example because I had it once. I had a hiring manager in Denmark who took their team to Legoland. Like initially, not the very first thing, but one of the first things in the cold call was, I noticed that you took your team to Legoland. That's a really awesome thing that your business does. How was it? Immediately, they're like, wow, this recruiter's actually taken 5 seconds out of his day to do a bit of research. Now, I'm not saying everyone has things on their LinkedIn to go from, but that's a good starting point, right? I actually done an experiment with a recruiter when I was the L&D manager at my old company. For cold email and for cold calling, I said, do me a favor, go on their LinkedIn and I'm going to put a timer for 30 to 60 seconds and I want you to see what information you can gather. This was a bit of a crap example because the client didn't ever post anything. They didn't even repost their company stuff. So I was like, okay, cool. Do me a favor and copy and paste the company name into Google and then click news. First thing that came up, they're launching this new product. They've got a load of investments. So I was like, cool, mention that in your cold call. So you have to go away and just do a few minutes worth of research. And if they're hiring as well, if they've got a job spec online somewhere that you can read through, so that if you're going to talk about your fantastic candidates, you can talk about the fantastic candidates and match them to the job description. Yeah. So research and preparation before a call. You don't need to spend hours doing this, but just spend a couple of minutes. Make sure you do a bit of preparation and trust me, the call will go a lot better. The second thing I mentioned is a lot of recruiters get stuck at the first hurdle with the objection. And this will go into my third point as well. My biggest advice to people that struggle with objection handling, if you don't have an L&D manager, if you don't have a coach, if you don't have leadership that role play these scenarios with you, and if you don't have anyone in the office that does that, then the culture might be a little bit off. But one thing I would say is grab a colleague and try and role play some of these scenarios with them, especially if you've got senior people within the business. There are going to be people that have had the, we don't use recruiters, or we've got an internal recruitment team, we're not hiring right now. Okay. So try and write down what your responses are, practice them. What I used to do is I used to think about the typical objections I would usually get, which were, if it was a bigger company, we've got a PSL, or, if it was a smaller business, we've got an internal team, we don't use agencies. And I would write down my rebuttals and my responses. But one of the biggest things that recruiters don't understand is that the minute you get an objection, you don't just immediately go to your rebuttal, because the client's back is just going to go up. So you need to show some empathy first, show that you understand, get on their level and try and understand the objection. And the biggest issue, and this goes into my third point, is the questions people ask. I'll get onto this in a second. But if you get the objection and you've written down your rebuttals and you're quite confident in trying to overcome said objections, after you've showed a bit of empathy, you have to question into why that is an objection. For example, if a client turns around and says, we don't use recruitment consultants, we don't use agencies, you don't just sit there and turn around and go, well, we're so specialist and you should use us because of this. They're just going to go, oh, do you know what, mate? Go away. Yeah. Firstly, my empathy statement, if a client was to say to me, we don't use agencies, would be, look, I get that. A lot of companies I work with right now said the very, very similar thing when I first started working with them. Out of curiosity, why is it that you don't use agencies? And then I would try and use linear questions like, okay, why else is that? Or what else is the reason, to really, truly understand that before I can overcome it? Because the reality is, look, I'm a salesperson at heart, right? In my mind, my stupid mind, I feel like I can overcome any objection. That's nonsense. Sometimes you can't overcome objections, but about 80% of objections are smoke screens. So typically you can overcome a lot of them. And a lot of the time, if it's a cold call, they're just going to say something to get you off the phone. And a lot of recruiters, what they'll do is they'll say, oh, we don't use agencies. They'll go, oh, okay, fair enough. I get that. Okay. And then the client will say, can you just send me an email? Yeah, sure. I'll send you an email. And that's it. Yeah. So practice your objections with a colleague, write them down, show empathy and question into them deep. Which leads me on to my third part, which is probably my biggest pet peeve in recruitment. It's recruiters that use crap questions. And when I say crap questions, I mean closed questions. I used to get beat by a closed question stick when I was in permanent recruitment. I would say it's traumatizing, but it's not really, because it actually really helped me build the habit of asking good open questions. And now I'm a full-time coach. I have to ask good open questions, right? But Charles, can't you use closed questions? Yeah. It says closed. Closed questions. You use closed questions when you close on a bit of information. Yeah. So I only ever use closed questions when I'm trying to close for specific bits of information, typically at the close of the call. So my biggest thing for people is, if you are asking a client, like, do you blah, 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 or can you do blah, 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 try and shift it so that you say something like, what does XYZ look like? How does XYZ? Why would XYZ? So just try and shift the can you do this, if you do this, etc. to what, how, basically all the open questions that start with like what, why, how, where, when, etc. If you do that, believe me when I say this, on a cold call, you are going to get a heck of a lot more information. So to close off the video, because we're coming up to 10 minutes now, how do people get 1% better after this video for cold calls? Well, we've mentioned there about getting better with objections. We've mentioned there about preparing and researching before calls, and we've mentioned about using better questions and open questions. So the biggest thing, if you merge all of those things together, if you get an objection, don't back down immediately. Don't just say, okay, fair enough, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, all right, no worries. Try and ask an extra question or two, but use a curious tone. If you're being quite abrupt with your questions, sometimes if it's a cold call and you haven't had a chance to build rapport, you're going to have someone that's going to have their back up and they're just going to almost push you away. So use a bit of a curious tone, and even don't be afraid of using the word curious. Out of curiosity, when would you potentially consider using an external partner? Something along those type of lines. So using the way you're speaking is also super important. So overall, people, research, prepare before every single call is the first thing. Practice and write down your rebuttals and your objection handling process, and make sure you master your open questions. It's my biggest pet peeve when I work with recruiters and they go, oh, that client was really, really rude, but you ask about 7 shit questions. Okay, so that's the little mini show here. Hopefully you've taken a bit of value. Hopefully you come away from this show 1% better off. And until next time.